I once deeply despised my new boss, who constantly mocked and belittled me, criticized me without reason, and even roared at me in front of everyone, pushing me to the brink of endurance. Recently, he even took credit for a major case that I had worked on. So I decided to give my boss a little punishment, just a small one. I drove alone to a tranquil town in the northeastern United States. The atmosphere here is peaceful and serene, with historic buildings lining the streets, and the pace of life is leisurely and comfortable. There is actually a reason why I came here. I had heard that in this small town, there is a woman named Madeline, whose shop contains some special items that can help people solve problems and even fulfill their deepest desires. After inquiring with the locals, almost no one seemed to know this woman. I wandered around for 3 days until I finally found an old man, a scavenger, who the residents told me had lived here for a long time and might know something. I found him in a corner bar, already drunk, and he spoke to me with a strong smell of alcohol. "Are you sure you want to find her?" I nodded affirmatively, and he said, "Just keep driving towards the back mountain. If she wants to see you, she will appear." The bartender laughed, saying the old man often talks nonsense when drunk, but I believed him. The next day, I drove towards the back mountain, somehow confident that I would find Madeline. When I reached a lake, I stopped to rest, and on the other side of the lake, I saw smoke rising. I immediately drove over. Indeed, there was a small house, looking like an ancient building left from some century past. As I pushed open the old wooden door, a strong scent of herbal medicine filled the air. The shop was dimly lit, and I could barely see anything, only faintly discerning some strange talismans and items hanging on the walls. Madeline stood behind the counter, her gaze piercing through the smoke-like atmosphere, looking directly at me as if she already knew the purpose of my visit. "You've come to me for a wish, haven't you?" Her voice carried an indescribable charm. I stated my wish. I mentioned my boss and told her how this man had tormented me, almost to the point of losing my patience. Madeline smiled slightly after listening, then turned and took out a strange item from under the counter, a small voodoo doll. "This is a voodoo doll, which can help you cast a curse on someone. However, I warn you, such power comes with a price." I was tempted, feeling this was exactly what I needed. The little doll looked ordinary, but I knew it would become the vessel for the resentment in my heart. So, without hesitation, I bought the doll and accepted Madeline's warning: "You need to be careful, this kind of power can backfire on the user." After returning home, I placed the voodoo doll on my bedside. Holding the doll, I whispered the incantation Madeline had given me and visualized my boss in my mind. A few days later, my mood became even heavier. Every night I dreamed of the consequences of the curse, seeing my boss gradually becoming weak and unable to get up for work. Negative emotions began to spread in my heart, and I couldn't help but wonder if this would really happen. A month later, my boss actually got into a car accident and is now lying in the intensive care unit. I was shocked when I heard the news, my hand trembled with regret. I felt it wasn't the curse's fault, it was his own careless driving. One night, I was awakened by a loud noise. As I came to from my sleep, I suddenly found my room filled with smoke and flames. The entire building seemed to be engulfed in an instant. A strong fear welled up in my heart, and I stood up trembling, preparing to escape. I rushed out the door to see the flames consuming the entire house, with smoke billowing upwards. As I looked back from a distance, I saw Madeline's figure, standing in the sea of fire, seemingly unharmed. Her gaze was still so deep and cold, looking at me through the smoke, revealing a chilling smile. At the moment the flames raged, I suddenly heard her voice echoing in the air: "Do you think this can be the end?" I desperately fled from the sea of fire, but the flames were too fierce, with beams collapsing. Standing in the midst of the inferno, my heart was filled with extreme fear and regret. I threw the voodoo doll clenched in my hand into the raging fire and immediately knelt down, praying to God for help and forgiveness. Fortunately, the fire department arrived in time and rescued me from the room. My home was completely destroyed, and all traces were consumed by the fire. Looking at the devastated homeland, I finally knew how powerful the backlash could be, but it was too late. Now, I spend every day in repentance. I'll never forget that Halloween. It was the last time my best friends and I celebrated the night together. We were 8th grade buddies, Jack, Sam, Megan, and me. That Halloween, by 8 p.m., we had collected all the candy in town, and Sam and I were still comparing who got more. Megan asked, "We still have a lot of time left, what should we do?" Jack suggested challenging the witch, saying it would be an ultra-exciting adventure. This witch lived in a dilapidated hut outside of town, rumored to practice witchcraft and own a talking black cat. At the time, we thought it sounded hilarious and thrilling, so we decided to give it a try. Jack was always the leader. He brought a firecracker, laughing and saying, "This will be the most unforgettable night of our lives." Sam grabbed his red marker, saying he could draw something scary. Megan carried a bag filled with scrap paper, tape, and some spray cans. I took a flashlight, feeling a bit scared inside but not wanting to show it. We walked through the forest and finally arrived at the house. It looked dilapidated, with walls covered in vines and windows broken like cracked mouths. Sam suggested, "Let's draw a skull on the door and then knock and run." Megan laughed so hard she couldn't straighten her waist, nodding in agreement. But Jack was not satisfied. He took out the firecracker, laughing and saying, "We should set this off to give her a real scare." We approached the house. Sam quickly drew a simple skull on the door with his marker. I placed the firecracker at the doorstep, and Jack lit the fuse. We quickly hid in the nearby bushes, holding our breath and watching. The firecracker went off with a loud bang, illuminating the entrance with sparks. We couldn't stop laughing, but the laughter stopped short. The door swung open violently. There she was. She looked thin, with messy hair and a gaze as cold as ice. She stood at the door and shouted, "You little brats, don't think you can get away." We were terrified and ran without looking back. We ran into the forest until we couldn't hear her voice anymore, leaning against a tree to catch our breath. Looking at each other, our fear slowly turned into laughter. But then we realized, Jack was missing. Did he run home? Megan whispered, her voice tinged with fear. Probably, Sam replied, but he didn't look so sure. Just as we were about to go back and look for Jack, we suddenly heard a scream, long and sharp, cutting through the night like a knife. "It's Jack!" I shouted, and we immediately ran towards the sound. When we found him, he was lying on the ground, clutching his ankle. His foot was swollen like a balloon, with a piece of wire next to it, like some kind of trap. He was pale, his lips trembling, saying, "Help me, it hurts so much." We were all stunned, as if frozen in place. Megan started crying, and Sam took out his phone to call for help, but there was no signal here. "What do we do?" I almost shouted. Sam took a deep breath and said, "We have to get Jack back to town." We sprang into action. Sam and I stood side by side, our hands tightly on Jack's shoulders, supporting him with all our strength. Jack gritted his teeth, enduring the intense pain in his ankle, trying not to collapse. Megan carried our backpacks, following closely behind us, her face pale. Suddenly, Megan screamed, "She's coming." We all froze, looking in the direction she pointed. The witch stood not far away, her silhouette in the shadows like a withered tree. Her icy gaze pierced the darkness, her lips curled into a sinister smile. "Run!" Sam yelled. We turned and ran, sprinting through the forest. Branches scraped our faces and arms, but no one dared to stop. We could hear a hoarse laughter behind us, urging us to run faster. Jack's injury made him unsteady, but we gritted our teeth and supported him, not daring to rest. Megan's panting and footsteps followed closely, with no extra words among us, only heavy breathing remaining. After running for what felt like an eternity, we finally saw the lights of town, a moment of renewed hope. "Faster, faster!" I shouted. We rushed to a house in town, pounding on the door until the occupants were awakened to help us. That night, we were finally safe. Our parents were furious and scolded us. I was grounded for 2 months, having to go straight home after school every day, and not allowed out on weekends. So, I couldn't visit Jack, and he never returned to school. One day, Sam came over to my house, and we hid in my room to chat. He told me Jack was going home to recover, but his family planned to move and transfer schools. Hearing this news made me feel terrible, so I decided to sneak over to Jack's house at night to see him. There was a tree outside Jack's room, and I climbed it, gently knocking on his window. He opened it when he heard the sound, letting me climb into his room. We talked quietly, and he told me his parents had taken his phone and decided to move to the town where his grandparents lived. "Why?" I asked. Jack lowered his head, his voice trembling as he said, "I have nightmares every night, dreaming of that which always hearing that laughter." He didn't continue, just looked at me with tears welling up in his eyes, whispering, "I'm scared." I couldn't find any words to say, so I just stayed silently by his side. Not long after, Jack really did move away. Jack seemed to be the center of our friendship, and after he left, Megan, Sam, and I grew increasingly distant from each other. Megan seemed to harbor a deep fear of that night's events, never wanting to speak of them again and gradually distancing herself from us. Sam placed all the blame on Jack, believing his firecracker had caused the trouble, which filled our conversations with arguments and awkwardness. As for me, although I understood everyone's emotions, I couldn't interact as naturally as before. Thus, our friendship slowly fell apart. After graduating from high school, because I was leaving home to go to college in another place, I mustered the courage to visit that place again. I walked towards the little house that had once scared us, based on my memory, but after searching everywhere, I could no longer find it. Standing there, a wave of indescribable melancholy rose in my heart. Recalling those adventures and friendships from back then, I felt both nostalgic and regretful. Perhaps, that little house and its legend had already become a part of our lost youth, disappearing along with time.